You want to take us
think
away?
We're ready to go. All right.
Cool.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Rebecca Baldwin-Cordick. I'm a farm planner and soil scientist at Mad Agriculture, and Mad Ag and my fellow teammates at Quivira are going to be, we're located in Boulder, Colorado and Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we would like to acknowledge that we operate on the very sacred ancestral lands of the Ute, Cheyenne, Pawnee, Apache, Diné, Comanche, Shoshone, and Pueblo tribes and peoples who have stewarded and continue to steward these lands today. This workshop is one of many to come that we've been hosting as part of our conservation collaboration grant. To bring both content like this to you, and also it supports our planning and conservation work that we have been doing with about 12 farmers and producers across Colorado and New Mexico. And so I'm so pleased today to introduce you all to our guest speaker, who is a lifelong defender of wild places on working lands. And he's the co-owner of the Alderspring Ranch with his wife, Carol, in North Central Idaho. And his story is even more exciting for me to share with you because I actually had the privilege and the adventure of working on their ranch 2 years ago after I finished my graduate degree. And I was able to see firsthand and participate in a small way in some of the regenerative work that he and his family have been able to perform through strategic partnerships with the Nature Conservancy and other organizations to really expedite real positive changes on the land. So here to talk about how he was able to forge some of those organizational relationships and the positive results of some of those projects is Glenn Elzinga. And I would like to remind everyone that if you do have a question that pops up during the presentation, just pop it in the chat and we will have time to address it at the end in a Q&A session. So with that, Glenn, take it away.
Well, thanks a lot, Rebecca. That was a really nice introduction, but you didn't really talk about how you had that experience here, and you should have inserted something along the lines that you live to tell about it. So, because there was some times when it was a little difficult. It was a little sketchy on those stints, especially up in Moose Creek, Rebecca. Remember that? So
there were some ticks around. There was some trying to herd animals in the dark and cold nights, but I'm all the better for all those experiences.
You certainly are. And I kind of am every year, even though my body's starting to get tired. But anyway, a lot of people ask, how did you come to, find a place in Idaho? How did you find a ranch? Basically, how did we find a home on the range? And these are the kind of people that ask the question the most. These are all quite a bit younger people than me. Some of them are my daughters, but most of them are this year's range rider interns. We get them from all over the country, and they all come here with a lot of questions. It might be how, but a lot of it is why. Why do you do this, and how do you do this, and how can I conceptualize something along these lines? And those questions come to be more and more often, and it's because in general, agriculture is kind of a frustrating place for a newcomer, because it seems like there's a lot of barriers to getting started. And there was even barriers for us when we got started in 1992. Carol and I were both ecologists. I was a forest ecologist. She was a range ecologist, actually a plant ecologist specializing in range plants and riparian plants. She's got a PhD in that discipline. So we were doing that for government agencies at the time, and both of us had a background that went way back in agriculture, in farming, and she was raised on a Midwestern bean and corn outfit, and enjoyed working with her dad there. I was brought up by an ex-dairy farmer who basically decided that dairy life was not for him, and squeezing those spotted cows twice a day was not something he wanted to spend the rest of his life doing. But he came from an ancestry that probably went back 900 or 1,000 years in dairy animals. And so, we both had a lot of this kind of inherited blood about agriculture. We both had a passion for it, and we wanted to get into it somehow. So we actually kind of gave partial notice on our agency positions, and we bought a small ranch in 1992, 7 cows, 143 acres. We had $30,000 in our pocket, basically, we could put down on this little ranch, and we had no inherited equity, and we got started. And those are the 7 cows right there. I even remember some of their names, and that's my youngest daughter, Melanie, in the picture there in my arms. So like I said, ranching's got really unique challenges. There's all kinds of things, you can read about business to further yourself. You can read Seth Godin, and I often actually read Seth Godin books, just to get some perspective on how to think about things. But there's very few contemporary books about, how to cover these unique challenges in ranching. First of all, the first thing I'll talk about is that math is hard, and math is absolutely unforgiving. It's black and white reality is the thing that takes a lot of people out of agriculture. Also, ranching in particular, because we live in the middle of nowhere, can be very isolating. We have geographic isolation, and as a result, a lot of that follows into just real live isolation from people, in terms of, a lot of us become introverts. A lot of us are introverts to begin with. I'm more of an extrovert, but I live in the Passamaquoddy Valley. It's an area about the size of the state of Rhode Island, and there's 300 people here. So we don't get together very often. And as a result, it can be very, very isolating. And where you can create relationships in a lot of other careers and workplaces, ranching doesn't lend itself well to that. Also, you're just subjected to somebody who has a completely different rule book, and it's nature. Nature takes no prisoners. It's basically either make it or break it with nature. And I'm going to talk about each of those 3 things and how we've come up with ways to hack each of those 3 things. And actually, it's more than a hack. It's figuring out things by way of relationship, which is an anathema for a lot of ranchers. First of all, math is hard, right? So I saw this in Successful Farming a few months ago. I guess it was a year ago now. That issue came in. I just took a picture of that cover right away. It says, what's your plan B? And so I'm wondering, what's wrong with plan A? That implies that there's something wrong with agriculture, right? So, what's wrong with plan A? And I'll tell you what's wrong with plan A. And this is what, a lot of those young people bring to me. They say, well, entry is capital prohibitive. You can't buy a ranch because they're just sky high in terms of the total investment cost. You're a slave to markets. You become price takers. Ag has a different view what profitability is. You can read business books and take webinars and listen to podcasts about profit in business, and ag's got a different set. And also, ag's got to focus on production, which doesn't always mean profitability. So first of all, entry is capital prohibitive. First of all, look at my hair in that picture. And you can see it here too. It's turning quite white. And you know what? I am like the stereotypical, age bracket in agriculture today. Average age in America for agricultural practitioners is 57.5 years. I'm going to be 59 here in a few weeks. Okay, so I'm kind of right in the middle. And there's a reason for that. And it's for 2 reasons. One, people don't want to tell their kids to get in agriculture because of these very barriers we're talking about. And they encourage them to get a job in town. They encourage them to go to college. And second of all, is that a lot of us have lived in a land appreciation climate. We bought cheap, and now we live on land that's appreciated greatly. And if you take the productivity value of a ranch, you find out that, well, it's not going to cash flow with regard to what the investment cost would be to buy that property. And then ag has a warped sense of profit. Here's the definition of profit according to Webster. And for some reason in agriculture, we don't pay ourselves. We work for free. We sell our calves, we get a calf check, and maybe we got $50,000, $60,000 left over after we cover cost. And instead of saying, well, that was our profit this year, that was just our wage. We're not truly running a profitable operation because we failed to take into account that our wages are actually part of our cost structure. So I just want to throw this at you as a theory I have. I was thinking about this, and why do we have these economic issues in agriculture? Why are they so different from business? And I think there's kind of three responsible areas where this comes from. First of all, educational institutions are not helping. They're actually encouraging this commercialism and reductionism and materialism in agriculture, encouraging people to buy more machinery, not reduce costs, to increase their costs actually, and increase productivity while sacrificing often profitability. Industry and trade publications are exactly the same way, of course, because they have a little bit of a bias, and that the green paint manufacturers want you to buy green paint. And the third one is that this happens in house. This is from grandpa, this is from pa, this is from great grandpa. They say this is the way we've always done it. So they become barriers to thinking outside the box and trying to become profitable, trying to become ecologically viable in agriculture. So how about we go with this plan B? What does that look like? I think it might be a little different than successful farming might say. But for me, plan B really was facilitated through these things. First and foremost, it was partnerships. It was creating partnerships, and they might have been knowledge partnerships. They might have been financial partnerships. They might have been partnerships where we have different valuation levels of the different facets that we get involved with in agriculture. Second is I wanted to control my market. I want to be a price maker instead of a price taker. And I want to earn a living wage. I want to be profitable on the place, have the ranch generate its own profit. And within that structure, I'm actually earning a living wage. So first of all, I think I'll slide this thing over a little bit here. We needed to actually do more than resolve the isolation. We actually needed to take it head on and create partnerships. And it started out with this man. He's in his late 70s, and that's me behind him in my early 30s. And we're working some calves here together. And another friend of his is behind that table there. The first guy's name is Ron Alder. Second guy's name is Gail Andrews. And they both became really good friends of mine. And Ron Alder happened to be the guy we bought our first ranch from. And, I don't even know how we first met the Alders. Carol and I just went there one day and showed up, and we had coffee with them. They were just so cordial with us and swung open the door and said, come and have a cup of coffee. And we became really good friends. And, and I told him, I said, I think I want to get back into agriculture, and raise a family on a farm or a ranch. And they were just so wonderful with us, because they actually just, literally opened the door. They opened their hearts to us, and they started pouring all this pioneer wisdom into us. They weren't really highly educated people by any means, but they had a ton of pioneer wisdom. They had actually, literally centuries of husbandry principles kind of drilled into them. They were conventional producers. They weren't organic. They weren't exploring niche markets or anything like that, but they just knew cattle, and they knew how to manage cattle, and they knew how to ride horses. They knew how to manage horses. They knew how to put up hay. They knew all these things that were just kind of the nuts and bolts tools that Carol and I really desired to have. But best of all, they had a very small little ranch, a hard scrabble place. They never made money, of 145 acres. And it was just a beautiful place. And one day, Carol and I just had been thinking about it. And one day we talked to him over coffee and said, would you consider selling this place and letting us buy it? And they said, oh yeah, we'd consider something like that. And I said, I don't even know what the market's like. Well, they said, just make us an offer. And well, we came back a few days later and we made him a very modest offer according to what real estate prices were in the valley at that time. And we offered him a unique sort of thing that was actually unheard of in the valley at the time. And an accountant friend had told us about it. And they said, hey, why don't you offer Ron and Frances a chance to stay there for the rest of their life in a lifetime estate? So that's what we did. We said, hey, Ron and Fran, we love you, and we just would like to have you stay around and help us if you want to, but you don't have to, and give us advice, because we'd love to hear from you and learn from you in this situation where we buy the place and you get to stay in your own home until you die, basically, and no cost to you. And meanwhile, we make payments during that time. And they just listened to us over a cup of coffee that afternoon. And it was one of those things. It's like, wow, I don't know if that's going to even work. And we walked out of the door, and we drove back home to the little log shack we were living in on the other side of the valley, about an hour away. And we got home and the phone was ringing, and it was Frances. And she said, Glenn, I just want to tell you, we accept your offer. And she said, we're so excited that we got to stay here, And there was more. There was an old cowboy just down the creek from them, also living on the place. He was kind of squatting, and Ron and him had cowboyed together for years. This is way back into the 30s or something like that. And his name was Ray. And well, I bumped into Ray a few days later, and Ray walks up to me and says, well, I guess that's it then. I said, what? And he said, I guess I'll be moving on. He said, I don't know where I'm going to go, but I guess I'll have to move on. And I said, why would you want to do that? And he said, because you just bought the ranch and it's time for me to move. And I said, Ray, you're not going anywhere. You're just going to stay here. I said, we're going to offer you the same deal we did to Ron and Fran. You guys just stay here on the place. And I said, wait, we love you, Ray. We just want to keep learning from you. And this old crusty cowboy, with all these wrinkles in his face and his battered cowboy hat and, pair of Levi's and pointed cowboy boots that have holes in them, looks up at me, and he had tears in his eyes. And, he said, I just never thought you'd let me stay. And so he stayed there. All of them stayed until they died. They actually died on the place quite a few years later. But so this is what I want to talk to you about, is these partnerships. These people are partners. And that is the way that I've realized that people need to reinvest. We live in a world that's just practicing huge amounts of isolationism in terms of relationship, especially with this whole thing, with the COVID situation. We've been driven away from each other. And I want to encourage people who want to get into agriculture or specifically ranching to think about, reinventing the word partnership and reinvesting in people. So these people are the kind of the foundation of thinking about relationship and partnership, and why that's so important for farming and ranching today. There came a time when we grew beyond 7 cows. This is on that same place. And we went from 7 cows and started running more and more every year until just, I think it was 7 years later, we were up to 250 mama cows. And we just were starting to overwhelm that little place. We had leased a whole bunch of other ground, and we knew we were kind of in trouble. We maximized the capacity of that little tiny place, and we're renting 600 acres. And I was in this this meeting down in Salmon. I remember it was a grazing meeting. We were learning about management intensive grazing, and a guy named Jim Garish, who is now my neighbor, who actually wrote the book called Management Intensive Grazing, was presenting. And this is before cell phones were ubiquitous. And this person came in and grabbed me out of the room and said, "Glenn, hey, you got to go. You got cattle run down the highway heading for North Fork, Idaho, and they're about to swim the Salmon River at flood stage." So I jump out of the meeting, jump in my car, and I just had this little Toyota, and just roar down the highway. This is opposite from our ranch. This is 45 minutes away from where we live, because we were renting pasture all over the place. And I got there in the pouring rain. Salmon River's at flood stage, and these cattle, I just watched the last of them jump in there with their babies. And we had about 30 heads swim across the Salmon River at flood stage. And my daughter was with me, and she just watched this movie called The Man from Snowy River, which many of you have probably heard. And she just said one thing to me. She said, "Well, you can kiss that mob goodbye." And it was a quote from the movie, because they just disappeared across flood stage of the Salmon River and into the thick cottonwoods on the other side. And ultimately, we never did see those cattle again until many months later in November. I called the grazing permittees that had that allotment. It's just a little bit of food for thought, I think, that was going on. And it was that we needed to find another ranch. And I was at a meeting in December of that year. And the Nature Conservancy was presenting this fairly new thing called conservation easements. And it was an interesting meeting, because there was this guy named Mark Davidson, who's become a very close friend of mine now. He's up there, and he's a pretty young guy. He's like my age, he's like low 30s. And he's presenting this conservation easement idea. He's the stereotypical environmentalist. He represents the Nature Conservancy after all. I mean, he was categorized, in the same league as Earth First or Sierra Club or organizations like that by all the other people in the room. There's about probably 100 cattlemen in the room, and I was just sitting in the back, and they started taking shots at him. Some people got really abusive with him and tried to run him out of town. Anyway, he stood his ground amazingly, and was actually very nice and civil all the way through the meeting. But anyway, I collared him in the parking lot, and I think he was kind of scared, as a tall, kind of rough looking character, I guess, in that day and age. But I reached out my hand and said, "Mark, I just want to meet you, because I just really like this whole idea." Because what he talked about was this whole process of conservation easements, and it's becoming a lot more common terminology now. But what it means is that you basically sell a part of your property rights to a conservation organization. It might be a land trust, it might be a nature conservancy, it might be a local government, and you're selling what we call a part of your bundle of sticks. That's, for some reason, that's become, around here at least, it's been a nomenclature. So the assumption is that you have a bundle of sticks associated with property ownership, and they might be development rights, they might be water rights, they might be right to farm, they might be ways how you fence, they might be wildlife easements, wildlife passage easements. There's all kinds of things that can be in that bundle of sticks. And for us, the parts of the bundle of sticks we really desired was an ability to ranch, an ability to spread water and get our fields in good productive stead, to run cattle in the custom and culture of the local, country. And shortly after this, after talking about these bundles of sticks with Mark, an opportunity came up to take a look at another ranch. And the Nature Conservancy had just bought this ranch. It was a 1,650 acre parcel up in the next valley, the Pacimroi Valley. And this is an aerial photo of it from Google Earth. And the unique characteristic of this land, I think you can see my cursor here, is this thing called the Pacimroi River. And Pacimroi River bisected this entire ranch. So there's private land on this side, private land on this side. And what was interesting about this piece, this reach of the Pacimroi River, is that 40% of all the Chinook salmon that return 900 miles from the Pacific Ocean spawn on this reach of river. And so the Nature Conservancy took a huge interest in this ranch and said, wow, you know, Chinook salmon are a listed species. You know, they're pretty threatened and endangered in the upper Columbia watershed, specifically the Salmon River watershed portion of the Columbia system, and said, hey, we need to figure out a way to ensure that the spawning habitat is maintained. And so we're going to buy this ranch. So I called Mark again immediately after this posted in the newspaper. And I said, hey, you know, I think you're not really interested in keeping that ranch, are you? He said, no, absolutely not. He said, we're interested in finding a willing partner to run this ranch and own it. And we maintain an easement to enhance that salmon habitat along that reach of the Pacimroi River. So there again was that partnership word, and it started to pull trigger in me, realizing that it was really the only way I was going to be able to expand and get all of our cattle in one basket instead of being scattered over 60 miles of the Lemhi Valley and swimming across the Salmon River. And Carol and I were like, you know, we've reached an ultimatum in our relationship with the business, saying, hey, if we can't get located on one piece of ground instead of leasing all these places, we're just going to quit. And part of it was that, you know, we had a certification for organic started on our ranch. And these sub ranches that we're leasing were also organic. And some of those landowners weren't favorable. They started spraying weeds on us and those sorts of things. So we'd have to cut those areas out of production for our organic purposes. And as a result, we were like, we need to locate on one piece of ground. So anyway, Nature Conservancy, you know, embarked on a long relationship with us. It took about 3 years to get through deciding what the whole place looked like. But you can see all these cool acronyms here, and I'll mention who they are. First of all, TNC, the Nature Conservancy. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had a vested interest in those threatened endangered species. Also, there was a lot of terrestrial species habitat associated with it. Bonneville Power Administration, they were the dam brokers, right? And that wasn't a cuss word. There was no pun intended there, but they were the dam brokers of the lower Columbia River. And there was, I think, 5 dams that they administered that impeded flow and impeded passage of fish up and down the Columbia salmon system. And they were interested in the fish as mitigation. So they were willing to contribute partnership as well. Idaho Department of Fish and Game, obviously, you know, got a vested interest in Chinook salmon returns. Chinook, by the way, is the same as king salmon in Alaska, same species. NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, you would think that they, and National Marine Fisheries Service associated with that as well, they were interested in the migratory species of, you know, Chinook salmon and the fact that they migrated to the ocean. So they had jurisdiction as well. And then, of course, there was the Natural Resource Conservation Service and the Soil and Water Conservation District branch of that, their local agents, you know, in Lemhi, Custer County, very interested. That little white line you see there was the county line between Lemhi over here and Custer County over here. So both counties had a huge vested interest in being involved with this. Idaho Fish and Game ended up wanting a piece of this ground down along the river and actually controlling 150 acres of that reach to ensure that, you know, we would never have cattle in that. We actually entered in an agreement with the Nature Conservancy for us to control this lower portion of the river as well, in our private ownership, with an easement there that had grazing restrictions, so we couldn't use it in anything but wintertime. So there was all these habitat things we had to work through. But really, Carol and I just wanted to be able to build a house, have a ranch that we could effectively run. And after 3 years, I'm glad to say we got through it. And we now have a working relationship that's been very positive all the way through. Now our fence line is right along here. You can see my cursor line, that's our jack fence right there. And this portion of habitat is currently Idaho Fish and Game. You can see all these little oxbows. There's a ton of terrestrial animal use and avian habitat that just took off as a result. But when we go down there, especially, you know, in August and September, we'll see lots of Chinook salmon spawning there. So what also is interesting is that we changed the whole water management scenario. A lot of it was flood irrigation, and we agreed to have them help us fund installation of center pivots to reduce irrigation use, reduce water use through flood irrigation. But it actually was a boon for us because it increased the efficiency of water distribution, and it was going to enable us to better manage pastures for the raising of grass-fed beef. So it was kind of a no-brainer from a productivity standpoint, but for them, it restored a reach of river that was currently being dewatered by excessive use through flood irrigation spreading for not only us, but for other partners downstream. So overall, you know, it was a very complicated project. That's why so many years going through lawyers and all these different bureaucrats, and we had good relationships with them all, and it came out very positively, and we're so grateful that we're enabled to embark on the road, because it's enabled us to be a productive ranch that is, you know, super high in habitat maintenance. But there's more. So the partnership thing, you know, I tried to start low with Ron and Francis Alder and Ray Rusk. And, you know, I just wanted to build different tiers on this thing because I want to really stress how important partnership is. And you know, it increased even more because there's a grazing allotment associated with this ranch, and it is a 46,000 acre grazing allotment called the Hat Creek allotment. And we're able to work with all these different partners and certify the entire thing as organic, according to the National Organic Program standards. So as a result, we're one of the largest contiguous blocks of certified organic land in the nation, if not the world. The last time I checked, 1% of all organic acres in America is part of Alderspring Ranch. And I think that's changing now because they're, but that was like 2 years ago. So, but you can, you know, that's a significant block, 46,000 acres. And it was only because of partnerships with all these people we drafted memorandums of understanding and letters with all these people. The acronyms are U.S. Forest Service, the BLM, the Idaho Department of Lands, Lemhi and Custer County, and the Idaho State Department of Agriculture Organic Program. So these guys and gals have just been super, super supportive in creating a relationship with us that we still have to maintain. You know, both of us give and take through that relationship every year. I shoot an organic plan, an organic systems plan to each of these agencies every year to just keep them on board as to how we're going to deal with things like noxious weeds and those sorts of things on our certified organic allotments. So that's been wonderful. And they've been all great to work with. So that Hat Creek allotment is pretty important for us. It's like I said, it's that acreage figure is actually wrong. It's 46,000 acres, but it's 70% of the green forage we consume every year. Elevations run from 1,000 to 3,000 meters. That's about a little over 4,000 feet all the way up to almost 10,000 feet. 88 kilometers of perennial creeks. That's about 55 miles. There's hundreds of wet meadows and springs. Okay, it's Forest Service, BLM, state, and our private grant. There's very few interior fences. There's 55 miles of perimeter fence. There's very few roads. Essentially, most of it's, has wilderness attributes. It's been in our ownership since 2005, and since then, the entire area has been certified organic. The grass and vegetation is 95% native perennials. There's 2,200 species or more on this grazing allotment. And of those, we estimate, and this isn't me, this is my wife, Carol, estimates that probably 550 are grazable by our livestock. So you can see these things are really important for the economics of, raising grass-fed organic beef, right? So before 2014, we were running 250 pairs and yearlings. We're riding about 2 days a week. They were scattered over that entire 43,000 acres, and we'd gather them in November. So we found out that wasn't working. And the reason it wasn't working was first, the wolves were annihilating us. Wolves were kind of picking up in speed as a species in our area. And we're losing as many as 14 head in a year. The other thing that wasn't working for Carol and I, both ecologically minded, remember we were ecologists before, was we thought coming into this deal, we'd be able to control our cattle and maintain these 55 miles of creeks. And we weren't happy with our results. Sure, they were kind of static. Some were improving a little bit, but we wanted a game changer. So we were working with this guy at the Nature Conservancy, Mark Davidson, same guy again. And I said, hey, here's the partner thing again, guys. I said, hey, we have this idea of what if we herded our cattle through the entire summer and controlled where they went and had total control. And basically we lived with the cattle and we practiced this thing that was kind of analogous to management intensive grazing on the range. And he said, well, how are you going to pay for this? And I said, that's where you come in as a partner. I was wondering if he could help us in year one and subsequent years while we kind of established a pilot on how to do this. And, he said, I think I might be able to pull that off because this is a unique idea. And so for a few years, the Nature Conservancy was a key partner in helping us kind of design a paradigm. Basically, we were reinventing one of the oldest professions, right? But after the advent of barbed wire, people had largely kind of dropped a reason to herd cattle and learn how to herd them effectively. Because think of it, prehistorically, pre-barbed wire, people were herding cattle for several reasons, some of which were the same that we would herd cattle. They were protecting them from predators. That's one for us. They were taking them to the best grass. That's one for us. They were keeping them from cattle rustlers. Well, when we started this, actually cattle prices were resulting in some people getting rustlers, and we weren't going to have any if we practiced in herding. They were keeping them away from dangerous plants or dangerous situations in topography. We do the same thing, So there was a lot of analogs to what had been practiced for thousands of years. We just had to relearn how to do it. And the Nature Conservancy partner with us in trying to figure out how to do that. So at the end of this red arrow, I just want to show you the scale. I'm standing at the top of the allotment, and this is a zoomed in photograph because otherwise you wouldn't even be able to see anything. But this is our grazing country, and you can see the entire Alderspring herd. There's about 350 head right there by my cursor at the end of this red arrow, just to give you kind of the scope and scale of where we're operating. It's pretty magnificent when you think about it, because you just get to see all kinds of cool country that you would never otherwise see, while riding and living with these cattle. So the crew lives and sleeps with the cattle. This is in what we call the Nighthawk camp, because we had nighthawks flying over camp all night. You can see we have these little individual teepees. That's the cook shack right there. And this is another camp we call the Bear Basin camp. You can see the little teepees and the cook shack and the horse string out there on a hot wire enclosure. We enclose our cattle every night with a hot wire. Here they are in timber in what we call Park Creek. You can see they got a stock tank, a gravity stock tank out of a spring right there to keep them out of the spring and the riparian area behind. And this is back in Bear Basin, same kind of thing. Here we are herding the bunch. This is Clyde, trusty border collie Clyde right here. I'm on Jasmine, the mare, and we're just watching the herd gather up. And here you can see riders just moving them to what is the best grass for that day. So this is a picture, this is the results of this kind of management. And again, it's thanks to these partners that we really were able to conceptualize and pull this off. Now we no longer are subsidized in doing it. We're running it at our, on our own pocketbook, because we've come to a scale now where it's actually, costing out efficiently for us. So anyway, this picture was taken in 1999 in Little Hat Creek. And you can see it's just like absolutely wiped out. There's no vegetation. These willows are hammered. Even the sagebrush is getting rubbed down. And notice this hillside up here. It's like just, these are cow trails, eroded cow trails coming down off this face. And there's not even sagebrush on this hill. A lot of this is bare dirt. Now check out this T-post right here. This is a metal T-post in the middle of the deal, 1999. Then I took this picture in 2018. I mean, this is the exact same spot. And I know we herded cattle just right here. You can see these ancient tracks from 1999 still there, where these cattle used to shuffle down to get to the creek. But we grazed cattle just right on this hill, but we never let them graze down in the creek because we were just herding them right by here. And, we drink out of a tank next to the creek or drink in a very limited portion of the creek. And as you can see, you just got a habitat boom going on. And, a ton of species started moving in. Here's further up at another key area on Little Hat Creek. You can see this is just a cow mud hole right now. And here's the same T-post in 2018. And it's just remarkable how recoverable these riparian areas are. And it's just such a huge thing. Here you can see, we have some super occasional use of cows where we'll just let them pick along these areas, but it's all regarded with a herder on horseback that'll gather these up when we see any degradation or bank instability resulting and take them right out of there again. And as a result, we didn't really have any beavers. We had historical beaver dams, from 50, 60, 70 years ago, still holding back sediment. But we had no fresh beavers, and now the beavers have started moving back into the Hat Creek allotment. At last count, we're estimating it's around 75 individuals have moved into the Hat Creek allotment since when we started grazing here in 2005. And most of them have all returned since we've practiced in herding starting in 2014. And, there's these incised features on the landscape we have. This one's in Bear Basin. And what's interesting about this is that none of these really started occurring, as near as I can tell, talking to old folks who had grazed up here. All of these are fairly recent phenomena. There was no big scarps on this landscape before, say, 50 years ago. And, the only thing I can surmise is that, extensive grazing use that was continuous without any control resulted in loss of vegetation stability on the surface. And as a result, these huge erosion gullies started happening because folks, we run between 400 and 500 head on this grazing allotment. Now, historically, it was 4,000 to 5,000 head. And I have pictures of grazing lands around this country that show no vegetation anymore existing. So we took some vegetation samples on a piece of ground that paralleled some stuff in Hat Creek, same soil series, same elevation, same aspect, same plant community type, same distance from water, within 10 miles of each other, and by another grazing person who runs continuous grazing. It's a group of people, and they run continuous grazing with about the same amount of stock, but entirely different density. So extensive grazing for the entire year. And we compared it with a piece of ground on Hat Creek where we practice in herding, and just to see if we were getting any change. And so our preliminary monitoring results from our plots and soil test digs showed that just in 8 years of inheriting, we've had 3 times more plant cover. We got 2 times more soil organic matter, and we got an average of 3 times the species diversity. And it's just by controlling cattle. This is a night ground where we put the cattle. This was actually rototilled by our cattle because we stayed there for about a week. And now you can see the vegetative expression is just extraordinary. And it's because it's been rested now for 6 years since we camped there. So high duration or very short duration, high intensity, long rest period grazing has proven to be key. And it's just about biomimicry, because prehistorically what happened here is we had large ungulates just travel across the landscape and move all the time. And it was a long period between grazing episodes. So we've created this home on a range all the way from below ground to the above. And that home is like, it's become habitat. Our soils, this is my neighbor's soil right across the fence on the left. Our soils on the right, we're running in the 7s on soil organic matter on some of our ground. And it's changed everything. Here's a rain on snow event on Alderspring last year. We had no standing water. And I was wondering where it all was going. But when I did some soil infiltration tests compared to the neighbor's soil, I found that his soil wouldn't take any water because it had no life in it. There was no soil biotic matrix there to take up water. Now our soil has become a sort of living sponge. And when it rains and snows on our soil, even if the ground's frozen, we still have the water soaking in. So we no longer have pooling. We no longer have overland flow on our ground. Here's same area, different day. The snow is now gone. It's still raining, and you can see there's no mud. We're driving here with a pickup truck, and we're not sinking in at all. So mud season on Alderspring is officially ended. And you're like, well, there's standing water. And I just wanted to bring this up because this is on our place, but this is a piece of ground that we farmed and tilled and disked. And our soil organic matter, a lot of it volatilized, a lot of it oxidized, and it's gone. And I've tested it. I know it's gone. It's probably running around between 1% and 2% here, but look what happens. The water is back on the soil, not going into the soil. And real quick, I realize what the recipe for dirt is. Remove your plant diversity. Graze more than 50% of your plants at once. Don't ever move your animals. Over fertilize it. Use sides, pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, fertilizers. Plow it, repeat. Disc it, repeat. Those create dirt. Very effective. But there was more. Above ground, we're getting really excited because our average daily gain was up 200%. All the way up to 3.4 pounds a day on irrigated ground. We had a big set of steers from the 33 ranch, or heifers from the 33 ranch. Kate Rasmussen's participating in this call, and she was born and raised on the 33 ranch. Anyway, we had a set of heifers from their ranch that we're finishing, and they averaged 3.75 pounds a day for 60 days a couple falls ago. We actually just measured them very closely because we wanted to see just how good our weight gain had gotten. So it was almost 4 pounds a day. And I've told feedlot owners, what kind of pounds a day we can get on big capacity animals. And they're in disbelief. They're just like, your numbers are wrong. And I don't think they are. These cattle were gaining weight like no tomorrow. Irrigation costs are down by as much as 20%. It's because we hold water in our soil. Hay removal, when we cut hay, 10 years ago, we cut our hay and the field would burn up, because we weren't able to irrigate while the hay was coming off, because we live in a pretty arid environment. Now our hay ground stays green all the way through haying. Our carrying capacity is up 2 times, from 250 head on this ranch to 500 plus head. And our home soil organic matter was up by 250%. And I measured the CO2 equivalents through talking to a whole bunch of highfalutin soil scientists of the world. I just kind of got how to do it. So I calculated everything out on a spreadsheet. And come to find out that over the past 10 years, we just on our home place, we're captured about 1,245 metric tons per year over a 10-year period, just because of the way our soil biology was taken off. So what that means is there's about 4 pounds of CO2 equivalents captured in the soil for every pound of beef that is grown on Alderspring. So we're climate positive, carbon negative, and we're excited to know that. And it's not difficult math, but it does require a lot of soil testing and some evaluation as things like bulk density to come up with those numbers. But if you'd like to figure that out, shoot me an email and I'd love to tell you some more. So here's that last part. Nature takes no prisoners. And we realize that with nature, we really need to be a partner with nature instead of, this adversarial, non-complementary role. So we really want to work with nature and figure out how to do it. So the first thing we found was adaptive stewardship grazing. And it has to do with what I was talking about. It's very high intensity, short duration. It's highly adaptive. We don't have rectilinear fences. We just use poly wire. Up on the range, we're using horseback. So it's extremely adaptive based on what climate is telling you, based on what, weather in a given situation is, what the topography is. Very long rest periods. On our home place, we're between 30 to 50 days. On the range, we're averaging 5 years between grazing an individual plant. And it all has to do with creating this root death with leaving great capability for the plant to revegetate following root death. Root death always happens after grazing. And if you can leave enough green material for that plant to revegetate through photosynthesis, through just solar collection, without relying on root reserves, you're going to win. You're going to build carbon in the soil like no tomorrow. And this is why cows are such an elegant solution to the carbon problem. Keep the soil covered. It's all about moisture retention. It's all about keeping biology alive and well. We hire animals. So it's not only cows, but we have pigs on the place. We have sheep. And I'll talk about that diversity shortly. We take sides against sides, pesticides, fungicides, any chemical use is probably going to have extraordinary effects on a lot of the biota that we don't even understand in the soil. We celebrate diversity all across the place. On our home pastures, we're probably averaging 55 species now on average, instead of what we started out as 5 to 10. And now on rangeland, we're exceeding 2,500 species. And it's key not only for the animal wellness, that graze these plants, but it's also key for the wellness of the soils. And on the home ranch, we're probably averaging 55, 60 species in a lot of areas. And what we've seen is increased use by wildlife as well. So we import biomass, and that's the form of hay. It's just simple math. I mean, if you keep removing biomass in the form of beef and hay, you're practicing extractive mining type agriculture on your soils. So we'll often import biomass through areas that are kind of nutrient deteriorated, organic matter low, and as a result, it's a game changer for soil life. And then we stack enterprises. So I talked about sheep, we got hogs, and we got cattle, all using the same ground. And nature does that. There isn't a natural situation where we don't see stacked enterprises in nature. And then we minimize iron use. The neighbors all own good iron. They all would love it if you give them a phone call so that they can help pay for their iron, because their iron's sitting idle a lot of times. So it's a win-win situation. They got iron we want to see used here, and I can't make hay equipment pencil on our place, and we do make some hay. And I have a neighbor who's happy to bring it onto my place and get paid to use it. And when you do all these things, you end up with something that's beautiful instead of something that's a biological desert. I don't know if you've ever worked on soybean and bean fields and pea fields, and cornfields in the Midwest, but they are biological deserts, and there's very little life in them. And it's because we've killed it all. There's been a huge shift just in the metrics of, Rebecca was actually involved in getting some of this data for us because we had no idea. We knew it was improving, but we didn't know what the degree of shift was. So there's the numbers. It was an average of 2.45 organic matter percent in 2009. When she measured it, it was a 6.7 on average, with a Haney average of 52 if you're a Haney person. And you know, we've doubled our capacity on the amount of cattle we can graze, and we've almost doubled our average daily gain. And what those things mean is that now we're profitable, and it's just because of soil capital that we become profitable. And then there's one last partner I want to talk about real briefly. And this is Midtown Manhattan, that's Central Park right there. And there's the Metropolitan Museum of Art there in the center of the photo. I don't know, it's one of my favorite museums. I've been there many times. But anyway, I have a lot of people who support us through partnership in buying our beef in this very city right here. They live right here. And we talk about the nature conservancy. We talk about Ron and Francis Alder. We talk about the Forest Service and the BLM. But these people are just as key as all of them. And it's that connectivity that we've lost in agriculture today. We've become this commodity world where it's nameless and faceless generation of food for people. But when we reach out to these people, you know, maybe it's just by social media, we've created a relationship. And it's those relationships that we got to reinvent in ranching and agriculture. Otherwise, we have no hope. We have no hope for that little kid in my hands. We have no hope for the 7 cows. We have no hope for those range riders out there who are just learning a trade. They're learning the way of keeping in rhythm with the land that's been practiced for thousands of years. We've become price makers and not price takers. It's very simple now. We're just this operation powered by the sun. Our customers are our partners and our friends. And we become resilient in the regeneration of soils and creeks. And my 7 daughters, I don't tell them to go get a job somewhere else. I tell them, please stay here. There's a place for you. There's hope in agriculture. There's hope in the soil under your feet. And that's why they're smiling. Actually, they're smiling because I think Carol just made a face at them to get them to smile for my camera. And as a result, there's Melanie there. That's my oldest. She's the crew boss now. I told her just a few weeks ago, she's 26. And I said, you know what? You are no longer officially an employee of Alderspring Ranch. You're an owner manager. And I tell all my kids that now because they're stakeholders. They're the future of agriculture. It's just like these kids we got coming as interns, you know, as range rider interns. They are the future. We got to invest in them now because my hair is gray and it's still growing, but someday it won't be. And we need to provide hope for this world that's changing rapidly, but it's all hope through a relationship connected by a love for the land, a love for the soil under our feet, and a love for the animals that walk on it. Anyway, thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I love to hear all your stories and to have them to share with everyone else too. I've heard some of them a few times, but they never get old. So, and I just I know if people have to jump off, it is 2 after 1. You can, but I just wanted to say thank you and
You bet.
highlighting you know, how important partnership is to making progress and actually just, you know, having a successful business and being able to do that while thinking outside of the box. So I mean, like, just how, you know, it illustrates how important it is to have you know, these stakeholders to like help you get set up in order to even like make the dream possible. And then you can take it from there. Like you said, you know, you had a 5-year pilot study of your rangeland experiment of inherding.
Yeah.
And, you know, how well have you been able to adjust, you know, after having that like supplement to then like you had that time to learn how to make that work? And do you think 5 years was enough? You know, like, and what was that process like of, you know, like making sure that everything was financially going to work out?
Yeah, I think 5 years is enough. You know, and I think it's really important, you know, I have a lot of relatives that are Midwestern corn and soybean farmers, and dang it, you know, I mean, they're getting a subsidy right now to produce corn and beans. And, you know, it's something they literally take to the bank. So say say, you know, I'd like to become regenerative. I'd like to build soils. I'd like to farm on a living soil matrix and drop my chemical use. You know, are they going to give up their price guarantees? Are they going to give up their subsidy? Are they going to give up their crop insurance when they do that? In a lot of cases, probably so. So it's really unfair for us to say, oh, guys, why don't you just jump through this regenerative window and make it happen? You know, because sure, they may be believers philosophically, they may be there. They may, you know, have this love for the planet, love for the earth, but, you know, they have like maybe 3 generations of farm riding on them. They have, you know, relatives and friends looking at them, high level of scrutiny, saying, are you going to lose this whole thing by this crazy idea? Why not just take the subsidy and drink coffee with the rest of us in the winter and just, you know, do what everybody else is doing, because it's what everybody expects. The government's going to support you. The banks are going to support you. Why do the different thing? And it's a really good question. It's completely valid. But if we flip that whole idea over on its ear and said, hey, what if instead, you know, we, through lobbying government and the farm bill, saying, hey, why don't we say, instead of these sorts of, you know, crop supports, insurance, those sorts of subsidies, why don't we just say, hey, we're going to help this person get established, get their feet under them regeneratively so that they can start reaping the benefits of a living soil, you know, in terms of crop yields and in terms of dealing with weeds and pests and those sorts of things. And we're going to give them 5 years to do it, you know, and we're going to take that money that would have gone into subsidy and insurance and support them in this way. To me, that's a solution, because it's the same thing we did with inherding to try to hack a solution. We needed some help because Carol and I had this idea, and, you know, we were just going to go out on a limb and saw it off. No, not really. We wanted to keep ranching. You know, we had a family. We were trying to make it. We were trying to make payments with the bank. And we're like, you know, there's other stakeholders that would be interested in helping us with this. And as Mark, you know, at the Nature Conservancy found out, indeed there were people like, yeah, that's a great idea. And I think there's stakeholders, you know, in terms of taxpayers who would be very happy to see, you know, the king corn, you know, maybe get sunsetted a little bit into maybe, you know, Prince corn instead, and have soil biota trying to take over the Midwest instead of just a monoculture of corn and soybeans. So they'd be happy to see tax dollars to go toward that sort of thing, to get farmers supported to find another way.
I think that's well said, Glenn. We did have a couple other questions, but again, if people need to leave, and I don't want to take too much of your time, Glenn, because I know you're very, very busy.
No, you're good. You're good.
So, Reed asked if there are any other ranches that have been practicing inherding that you know of. And if not, how do we get them on board?
Well, there's this one gal, Kate Rasmussen, who was going to practice it on the 33. And I'm wondering, Kate, if you guys have done this. Your dad was talking to me about this. What happened? I heard about this cabin out in the middle of nowhere. You going out to live with, what's going on, Kate? Come on, come clean.
Well, I believe it to the folks at the ranch to do it, and needed to stretch my legs and do it. I'm kind of doing it in Oregon,
Cool.
a little bit. Yeah, there's potential there in the future to do it at home.
Yeah.
Get those heifers used to it before they send them to you.
Yeah, no, that would be very cool. And I think there's a lot of possibility there, but it's that step, Rebecca, to saying, hey, do I really want to spend money on trying to figure this out? So it's a huge piece of bandwidth to figure out, and there's people
A lot of risk
embracing,
to take on.
there's people embracing different aspects of it, so if I can just move the needle, I don't need somebody to say, hey, we want to do it just like you, Glenn. I don't care. All I care is that they're thinking regeneratively and saying, hey, we want to move our animals, because these dry ranges in the West, which are, what is it, 1/3 of America's landscape is dry grazing. It's not cropland. Okay. So 1/3 of it is dry grazing. Most of it's here in the West. And if we could move the needle on that dry grazing ground to start putting carbon back in the ground by creating soil biota through long rest periods, well, that's huge. I don't care how you get it done. It might be hot wire. It might be more creative fencing. It might be like getting into a grazing association with 20 different other permittees and saying, we're going to rest every one of these ranges and run one big herd on a given range, so that we only graze that range once every 5 years, something like that. There's all kinds of creative solutions where a person could get those kind of rest periods to give the land a chance to breathe and give those plant roots a chance to reform after grazing. So the possibilities are endless. I just want people to think continuous grazing and simple rest rotation grazing plans are not working. They are not working. We're desertifying the Western landscape right now. We're actually, people hate that word because they like to apply it to Somalia, Ethiopia, countries like that. They're the bad people. But I was with somebody in the truck yesterday and I said, I know people hate this word, but we are doing it. We're doing it in the arid West right now, and we're affecting climate when we do it.
And I think that's why it's so important to have, multi-generations too, sort of around, so that they can actually bear witness to what has changed in their own lifetime, and share that. I guess we have another question just about your internship program and how you built that, and how that's beneficial to you, how that's grown over the years.
So this year, Melanie and my oldest daughter and my third oldest daughter, Linnea, actually took the entire thing over. So, you know what? This is a weird thing. I think it's Instagram. Who knew that social media could be this powerful? So, Instagram is probably the biggest venue we use to just tell the story. And when you tell stories, people say, hey, I want to be part of that story, so they've created kind of a leadership in how to think about these things. And when people see that, they want to join your tribe. And when they want to join your tribe, some of them actually want to join with their whole heart, soul, and body. And so we get a lot of people, with inquiries saying, hey, how can I be part of this? So it's actually, people diss social media, but it's so powerful. And it's, there's so many positive things with social media, and that's one of them. It's just created kind of a huge possible application pool. So, we put out a ad on Instagram that we're looking for applications for internship range riders. And 270 applications later, it closes like 10 days. And it's pretty incredible. And, so many wonderful people. That was the hardest thing, to select, 11 people from that group. Because I'm sure I missed many, 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 many good ones. But sometimes you got to disqualify somebody on something stupid. They forgot to put this in their package. And, I don't have time to chase them down, and neither do Melanie and Linnea. And they just say, hey, they didn't do that, they're gone, and I hate to do that, but it is what it is, because there's just so many people that were great. It was really hard to select them.
And what is your philosophy on animals size? What size of animals are you running?
Ooh, now we're getting into dangerous territory. I'm not totally hung up on genetics. I mean, there is a right kind of genetic on this grass-fed thing, for sure. And, I lean toward English genetics. And the only reason I lean toward English genetics is because in that tough northern climate, especially of Aberdeen lines in Scotland, was, it predisposes these cattle to not only back fat, but also intermuscular fat. And intermuscular fat is pretty important to me because we call it IMF. IMF is the thing that it's the carrier for so many of these phytonutrients, these plant chemicals, these plant compounds that we like to see in our diet. And I don't even, I can't even enumerate them. There's thousands of them. And, I know they've affected the wellness of our animals because we don't get sick animals anymore. I think we've had one we had to terminate over 6 years of inherding. This is out of several thousand head now. And our sickness rate is for the ranch over year round is well under 2% now. And I think it's because of the phytochemical diversity that these animals are taking up. So when we eat beef, a lot of that is carried in the fat. And if you have IMF, you're going to find a lot of nutrition in those animals. So that's why English cattle, and that's also why I choose a smaller frame size. So when you're talking about animal size, a mature cow that would be ideal for me would be 1,000 to 1,100 pounds. Maybe an older cow as much as 1,200. But Aberdeen Angus bloodlines have largely been watered down by breeds like Simmental and Solaires that are also black, that slipped into the black hided tradition of Angus. And as a result, we started building frames that were, coming in at live weights at 1,500 to 1,600 pounds. Feeders like them because they got great profitability conversion with pounds per day with those super capacity rumen, super rumen animals. You can get 5 to 6 pounds a day on corn in a feedlot. And you can yield a carcass that weighs almost 1,000 pounds. For us, our carcass weights average like around 550. So part of the problem, part of the enigma on grass-fed beef is it takes longer to finish them. So if you have a large frame animal that's going to reach physiological maturity later on grass, it's very difficult to finish that animal before 30 months of age. At 30 months of age, the USDA has developed this arbitrary rule that animal carcasses must have their spinal column removed for the sake of protecting the culture from mad cow disease. And, we could go into a long discussion as to whether or not that's valid, but the fact of the matter is that 30-month rule exists. And if I got a large frame, late physiological maturity animal, I'm going to have a hard time finishing him or her on grass to get that intermuscular fat development before the age of 30 months. So I'm just not a fan. And these large animals aren't efficient in the mountains. And that picture you're looking at here on the shared screen, you can see, there's a lot of topography there. There's a lot of tough country to walk through. When you got an animal that's weighing, 1,200 pounds, and they're not even fat yet, they're going to have a much harder, it's just physics, problem of going up and down hills. So yeah, so very, very short story long. I'm a fan of small frame Angus animals. Oh, I got you mute.
I am on mute, sorry.
There you
about
go.
I guess I'll just take one more question, and that was Zach, a share, wanted to know if anyone else is doing something similar by taking interns on other ranches.
Yeah, there are. There was a gal in near Darby, Montana, just north of us by a couple hours. She had an internship program where she took on 4 or 5 interns. There's quite a few ranches that are taking internship folks, and it's because there's a lot of people just with an inherent love for animals and agriculture, and especially some of these cowboy traditions. They want to get on horseback again, and they're just seeking what is a potential dream, and with an internship, they're going to get kind of real skills in hand to hopefully be able to pursue that. I hope these internship programs are a way that they can actually stair step their way into, a living, a life, like for instance, I got one guy who was an intern for me for several years, worked on and off as a range rider, as a paid range rider subsequent to that. And I called him up the other day and I said, hey, what do you think about being a ranch manager for me if I leased another ranch? And he called me back in about 3 days and he said, I would love that opportunity. And I said, well, you just moved from employee to stakeholder. So, and he's so excited. He showed up about 2 weeks ago and he took over a lease ranch down the valley from us. And it was a trouble spot. It was totally run down. And this gal who's aging, she's in her 70s, and she's just fit to be tied because she's seen this whole place go downhill. Her husband passed away about 15 years ago, and she didn't know what to do, and I just called her one day and said, hey, what do you think about me just taking that place? And I said, I think I got a guy who can manage it for you. And she said, Glenn, I would just so love that if you do that. So again, it's about relationship, right? Just went down there, knocked on her door one day and had a cup of coffee and we talked, and she had tears in her eyes at the end of our talk. She said, this could save me because I don't know what to do. Right now, the place is not even saleable because it's junked out. It's all run down. The fences are flat. The pivots are not working. There's foreign cattle getting in all the time. And she said, it's just a giant mess. And anyway, this guy's working his butt off down there. I gave him a truck, gave him a 4-wheeler. And I said, year 1, I pay your wages. Okay. Give him a horse, pay your wages. Year 2, you take over the whole thing. You sign the lease. It's your baby from then on. I take pasture from you. I take hay from you and I buy it on the open market. And I said, it's going to allow us to expand, but the whole thing's in your pocket, and he was a full-time welder in Boise before this. And I asked him how it's going the other day. And he said, you know what? I love welding. I loved it. And he said, every day I enjoyed my job. But he said, I've come up here and I work longer and harder than I ever have. And he said, I haven't worked a day yet. And I've been up here for 2 weeks. I'm just having fun every day. Every day is just fun. And I said, that's exactly what I want to hear. And, so it's that I just want people to realize that, when you take these interns on, I had another one in the truck with me the other day. I said, you know what? You're moving from point of intern into employee. And he said, I want you to consider, just like this other guy did, to become a stakeholder someday, to become like a manager of something. You become part of our operation and take over something, make it yours. And I think that's really key, that we got to offer those kind of steps of opportunity for people. That's really exciting because, man, then we have hope because we have, mentorship and transition. All these people around that neighbor down there have surrounded this guy and they're helping him. There's people showing up, neighbors saying, hey, I heard you're going to take over this place. I'm showing up with a backhoe tomorrow if you need help, and it's just wonderful because, it's all about these partnerships that this whole webinar is about, right? It's those relationships and partnerships, and you're building that in these young people, because even us old people, like I'm an old person, we look and say, boy, agriculture can be so hopeless because a bunch of us old dirtbags in the deal, you know. We need to get young people in. And when I see young people and other people see young people, they get excited and they want to help.
I think you're on to something there, Glenn. And I think it really does change the psychology of how you're working if you know you have some stake in it as well.
Exactly. Yes.
So, oh, well, it was so great to have you, Glenn. I so appreciate the time and sharing your stories and with us all. So, but yeah, I hopefully we'll be keeping in touch here. And
you bet. I'm sure we will. So
yeah, you guys
keep in touch and stop by sometime. Rebecca will put you on a horse and you can relive your.
I do miss it.
And Kate,
So I might
Kate Reed, you better get over here. You better get over here, guys. So talk's cheap, you know. Talk is cheap.
Oh, well, take care, Glenn.
All right. Good deal. And Jess,
Glenn.
Jess, you can come by anytime too. I'd love to have you.
All right, sounds good. It'll be my first time. We'll see how it goes.
You bet. Say hello to the rest
Thanks,
of the
everybody.
team. Jess, down there
Thanks,
when you're down
Zach.
there.
Yeah, we'll do. Thank you so much, Glenn.
You bet. All right, guys. Thanks again. It's been fun.
One sec. Rebecca, are you
Let me throw.
Yeah, I think so.